Welcome to the Stop Ruining My Childhood podcast.
A sometimes nostalgic, sometimes cynical look back at pop culture.
Join us as we revisit movies, cartoons, and live-action TV of the 80s and 90s and ask the question,
does this hold up, or did I just ruin my childhood?
My name is Megan.
And I'm Steve.
And today we are looking at G.I. Joe, a real American hero.
Exactly. Don't forget that.
You can't forget that part. So if you haven't listened to us before, our format is that we rotate every 3 weeks. We talk about a cartoon, and then a live-action TV show, and then a movie. So last week we talked about Troop Beverly Hills. This week we're talking about G.I. Joe. Next week we're talking about the live-action show Manimal, forgotten TV show of the 1980s.
A gem.
We'll see. But for G.I. Joe, you can find it on Tubi. It's a free streaming service, and all of the forms of G.I. Joe seem to be on there. There are 4 different shows. So we're going to talk about the original show and the second 1980s show, and then also some of the reboots. And what's a show without a good nostalgic snack?
Yeah, and this week's nostalgic snack is candy buttons. For when you need fasteners for your clothes, but you might also like a snack. Candy buttons.
Candy buttons. So if you haven't had candy buttons before, they come on... I'll talk while you eat, and then you can talk while I eat. They come on a sheet. They're basically little dots. So we have pink at the top. That's the cherry. The middle is the lemon. And the bottom is the lime. So it's pink and then yellow, and then kind of green and going to blue. It's a nice rainbow effect.
Yes, and it's super sugary.
Very sugary.
It's pretty much, I'm assuming, just liquid sugar dropped onto this wax paper and allowed to dry.
It's basically sugar with a tiny bit of cornstarch and then a lot of flavor.
It tastes a lot like Smarties. Or Sweet
Tarts?
Sweet Tarts, maybe. Kind of a hint of candy necklace in there.
No. For me, yeah, I think the Smarties, it's the same, like, consistency, texture. But I just love candy buttons, but the kind that I would get, we lived right around the corner from 7-Eleven, and they wouldn't have them all the time. They would just have them, like, sometimes. So when they had them, you'd get super excited. Mm-hmm. But it'd be, like, really hot day in July, and the candy buttons would kind of stick to the paper. And so I do remember, like, my friends and I just being like, we're just going to straight up eat this paper.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those snacks.
This is a higher quality, like, wax paper today, but...
Yeah, this is one of those snacks that's like a nostalgic snack, because I think it was probably nostalgic in the 80s when I ate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it was popular, but I think these, because my thought is that they've probably been around for a while.
The flavoring is a tiny bit like sherbet. I used to eat the lemon ones first, and then the lime, and then the cherry, because the cherry were my favorite, but I'm really digging the lemon right here. I think the lemon's quite good. Probably because it's not quite as sweet as the cherry. The cherry's like a little bit much for me, but I like it. All right. We rate things, if you haven't heard us before. We rate things, snack is on a scale of 1 to 5. And the show is on a scale of 1 to 10. And because it's G.I. Joe, we're going to give them awards today. Like a medal.
So, medals. Okay,
medals.
So how many, out of 5 medals, what are you going to give candy buttons?
You know, I'm going to get, it's not, we had creamsicles like a couple weeks ago, and that I would eat all the time. This is like, it is very, like, I'm getting a childhood memory as I'm smelling and eating it. Am I going to buy it again? No. No. Maybe like a 3.5.
Yeah, I would give it 3 medals out of 5.
I'll give 3. All right.
It's good once in a while, but I think it's probably too sugary.
It brings back some memories. But having said that, I think if you were a kid, the color, the fact that it is like little, the artificial flavoring.
I think you have to work to pick them all off the wax paper.
Yeah, exactly. Or you just eat the paper.
Oh.
If you have no patience and you're a kid. Yeah, so, okay, 3 medals for candy buttons, worth another try. Oh, I should mention this too. We have a blog on our website, stopruiningmychildhood.com. It's Watch With Us is the tab. And you can find links for all of the candies that we try or the snacks that we have, as well as the shows that we watch. And sometimes I try to link like some other fun tidbits in there too, different articles where we find some of our history and things like that. So definitely check that out if you're looking for candy buttons and you can't find them. They're on there. And so are the episodes that we watched for today. So, Steve, do you want to give us the rundown?
So,
a quick overview.
G.I. Joe. What you need to know about G.I. Joe, if you've never seen it before, is that G.I. Joe is a cartoon about an elite special forces military team for the United States. G.I. Joe is America's most elite special fighting force, and they're always at odds with COBRA, which is a terrorist organization that seems to have a lot of money and resources. And so pretty much all G.I. Joe cartoons boil down to G.I. Joe trying to stop COBRA from some sort of scheme or plan to disrupt the world or hold the world hostage or take the world over. Whether it's like a weather machine or, a major bomb or hijacking things. There's always some kind of major plan that COBRA Commander, the head of COBRA, has in mind, and G.I. Joe's always trying to infiltrate that. So that's pretty much the premise of G.I. Joe.
So it is always COBRA. I wondered that from the episodes
for the
we
most
watched.
part, it's always COBRA. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so the first episode we watched from 1983 was Season 1, Episode 1, Cobra Strikes. And it basically surrounds Duke, who is the leader of G.I. Joe, and Scarlet, who's one of the main characters that's in most of the cartoons originally. They are trying to stop Cobra, they're trying to steal a satellite. They've created this large gun that it looks like with a crystal on it, that if you put 3 different really rare minerals into it, it can teleport things. And so they teleport this space satellite and take it hostage, and then they start taking hostage like the Eiffel Tower and all these other large, historically significant things across the world to hold the world hostage to basically bow to Cobra. And so Duke, Scarlet, Snake Eyes, some of the original members are all trying to stop this. Duke, he tries to stop them, and he ends up getting teleported into their base, where he ends up being taken captive, as well as being in a good position to help try to stop it from the inside.
And also along the way, Scarlet and Duke are kind of winking at each other and flirting
Sort of,
bit.
yes.
I don't want to leave that out of the summary for me. That was a big point. So we watched that, and then we're going to recap just the other one that we watched, which was Season 1, Episode 1 of the other G.I. Joe. So basically, this show ran we'll talk about the history of it in a minute, but essentially it was marked as 1986. I'm not sure if that's exactly when it originally aired.
Yeah.
But this episode was called
Pyramid of Darkness. There's a lot more characters in G.I. Joe. They've expanded the roster. Flint is now in charge. He's a different character. Duke got promoted to general. He still cameos in some cartoons, including this one, but Flint is kind of the guy in charge. And now it's Flint and Lady J instead of Duke and Scarlet. And there's a few others. There's Shipwreck. There's Snake Eyes is still there, although they've upgraded Snake Eyes as well. So now he doesn't wear a blue outfit, but he wears a black outfit. He now has a sword, and he has a wolf, Timber, for some reason. Shipwreck, who's a sailor, also has a parrot who's mouthy. So they've added a few pieces to it. I don't know, to add a little bit more humor to the action cartoon.
Or sell more toys.
Yeah, or sell more toys. Cobra Commander is still in charge of Cobra, as well as Destro, who's his right-hand man. But you've got other characters as well. There's the twins. Other people have been added. And so basically here you have, once again, Cobra Commander is trying to hijack a space shuttle that's being sent up to a space station that G.I. Joe owns. It seems like they get fought off by G.I. Joe, but apparently they tricked them, and they still put something in the space shuttle. And when the space shuttle arrives, it has these cute little teddy bear looking things that Cobra activates, and they become these large monsters that attack the G.I. Joes that are on the space station and try to help take over the space station.
And then we move from space to underwater. We have a large underwater battle.
Yeah, that same episode, You've got, while that's happening, some of the other G.I. Joes, Shipwreck and Snake Eyes, are trying to sneak into Cobra's base, which is underwater. and so they're going underwater. They fight these large giant robots, and they end up sneaking into the base dressed up as Cobra soldiers or Cobra workers, and then they get in and try to undo everything from the inside out. And that's kind of where that ends. We watched a part 1 of a part 2 piece.
Both of these were 5-part mini-series. I want to say we did watch a couple other episodes from the reboot, and we'll get into that when we do like our full recap, but the history of this show, to me, it's quite interesting. Steve mentioned G.I. Joe is an elite task force, and that's the code name. I had no idea before watching this for this show that was a code name. I thought G.I. Joe would be starring G.I. Joe.
Oh, you thought he was a person?
Yeah, I thought it was a person. And Cobra, there's a number of different theories about what that stands for. But some people say that it could stand for conversion by blackmail, revolution, and anarchy. But it really, as some of these cartoons did, starts with the toys. So it's not a doll, right?
It's an action figure.
It's an action figure. And the whole premise of this toy was that it would have a lot of movable parts. And they named them specifically with the word action in them. So action soldier, action sailor, action marine, action pilot. One for each branch of the military. And this was in 1964. Mattel had Barbie. Hasboro had a pretty big hit with Mr. Potato Head, but they were looking for something to kind of compete with Barbie, and they wanted to tap into the boy market, since Barbie was kind of dominating girls.
The interesting part about that was those original G.I. Joes, though, were the size of Barbie.
Yeah, they were. They were 11-inch figures.
Yeah, and they had clothes you dressed them in like a Barbie.
Yeah, and I asked my mom if she had one, and she said, no, I was 13 and I was more interested in Joe who lived next door than G.I. Joe. I was like, all right then. But I think her younger sisters did. But you mentioned the clothes. So I'd never heard this term before I started doing research for this episode, and it's called the razor blade model of selling stuff. That if you have a razor, you have to buy razor blades for it. Back in the day, now they come together.
Yeah. Gillette makes way more money off blades than they do razors.
Way more, yeah. Right. Or like today, if you have a printer, you have to buy tons of ink, right? So the idea is basically you buy the toy, you have to buy the clothes, the accessories, the vehicles, right? All of that kind of thing. But they wanted him to be a real American hero, not a superhero. That's where that phrase came from. So he was to be a real person that you could kind of aspire to be while you played. So kind of like Barbie is meant to be aspirational with all these different jobs. Boys who would play this, and sometimes girls, but mostly guys, are kind of aspiring to be like G.I. Joe in their play. And I also... This isn't like a huge thing, but I just think it's so cute because we also had this with Strawberry Shortcake, but they had read-along books and book and record sets that they sold. And I was like, oh, I forgot about those. And I didn't mention it when we did Strawberry Shortcake, but they put on hold for a few years in the early 70s because of Vietnam and the public opinion about the military. But they relaunched it again after that, and now it had the Kung Fu Grip, the very famous Kung Fu Grip. It's more adventure oriented than military, so like they have an aquanaut instead of a naval officer. And then they put it on hold again from 78 to 83, and then they relaunch it with these 3 3/4 inch action figures.
Yes.
As opposed to like the Barbie sized doll.
Yeah, the 10 or 11 inch Barbies.
Yeah.
They drop it down to 3 1/4 inch, which is the
plastic
standard for action figures now.
The interesting thing, too, which we'll get into with our recap, is it was a more... We've talked about this before with some of these shows, and I didn't really understand why some of the rules changed. But basically, under the Reagan administration, the FCC allowed more violence in children's programming, as long as it had a message. And during that time, you know, you're talking about the Cold War toward the end, but still, they didn't know that. Right? And so a bigger interest in military stuff. So they would have these messages at the end of each video. So along with the cartoon, we also have the toys. What I thought was interesting was that they kind of developed them together, side by side, and they had help from Marvel, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, G.I. Joe comic book came out around the same time and told stories as well, which was pretty impressive.
They wanted them to have more developed personalities.
Which they did, yeah.
And I think not to preview things too much, but in comparison to some of the later versions of this that we saw, their personalities, I think, were very distinct. So we have personalities that Marvel kind of helped to create. It's funny to me, it's called Action Man in the UK. But this basically kind of, it exploded. It was a number of 5-part miniseries, and then the actual series in 1985 and 6 had 95 episodes. They were going to release a film in theaters, but Transformers and My Little Pony both had films, and they didn't do that well.
85 and 86.
Yeah,
yes.
And so they had a problem with animation rights and licenses. The people who were animating it lost the animation rights, and whatever. At any rate, they brought it back in 1989 to 1991, and again, they had these 5-part miniseries, and then the actual episodes. But the series really were produced to sell the toys, and you had, as Steve mentioned, a whole new roster, right? Yes. They would keep adding characters so that you could have these characters as the toys.
Yeah, you could buy toys.
Yeah.
Right? It was like we saw with He-Man. It just exploded with characters so you could buy more toys.
Yeah, so the universe just keeps getting bigger and bigger, which again, not surprising given that Marvel helps them with it. But I think it's interesting. I don't know, and I should have looked up whether or not the pets came, but they had the TV show, they had a lot of VHS things. They even put some stuff out on Betamax.
Which would have been when they first started.
Right?
Yes.
I just think that's funny. DVDs, and then they had the live-action adventure movies, 2003, 2014, and 2021. So, yeah, so this is a big part of our childhood. When you look back on it, you can see how kids are maybe being manipulated to buy the toys. But at the same time, it is a place where your imagination can kind of grow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're going to pause. We're going to come back and talk about some of those memories. So we'll be right back. This podcast is supported by its creators
and listeners like you.
Help keep our show ad-free by visiting our website, stopruiningmychildhood.com.
There you can find links to our social media.
And this very podcast you're currently listening to.
Both Megan and I are authors, and you can find links to our books on our About page.
And on our Watch With Us page, you can find videos and links for all the shows and movies we discuss on the podcast.
And more importantly, links to buy the nostalgic snacks we review as well.
We also post bonus content about once a month.
So subscribe, and follow.
For a small independent podcast like ours, it really does make a difference. Thanks. And now, back to the show. Okay, so we are back again. My name's Megan.
And I'm Steve.
And we're going to talk about some of our childhood memories of G.I. Joe, and then get into the full review and recap. So, I don't really have that many.
So I have a ton. I watched the cartoons growing up, religiously. I watched all the cartoons. I have 2 brothers. I'm the oldest. I have 2 younger brothers. And my parents spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on G.I. Joes. We had almost every G.I. Joe that was ever made.
I'm about to say, not all at once, right? Over many Christmases.
Over a number of Christmases, but we collected them fairly fast. Because also you have 3 boys, and they're each getting toys.
Right.
But my brothers and I didn't keep our stuff separate. We just piled it all in a box and played together. So we were able to amass a lot. Not to mention we would get joint gifts. Like, we had the space shuttle, which was large.
How large are we talking?
It stood probably 18 to 24 inches off the ground.
Oh, wow, okay.
And it could come off of its launcher, and the boosters could separate from the shuttle.
Nice.
And it came with a pilot.
I'm as you're talking, I'm I want to play with that right now.
Yeah. We had the Rattler, which was the blue Cobra jet that had hover engines on it. The wings actually turned, and you could hover up and down to take off. We had the Terror Dome, which was the bad guy base. We had the USS Flag, which not many people own. The USS Flag was a toy that I would say there was not many made, and not a lot of people owned, because it was an aircraft carrier
Okay.
that was made to scale so the jets could land on it. So this aircraft carrier was 7 feet long.
But you guys had a basement to play in.
We had it set up in the basement.
I was going to say, most kids, that would take up their whole room.
It was about 3 feet high with the tower on the aircraft carrier. Because you had the aircraft carrier deck, and under the deck, where things could go, you had people in the towers. And it was, if I recall, when it came out, and this is in the mid to late 80s, I mean, the USS Flag cost well over $100. For a toy, that's really a lot back then.
But it was also for all three of you.
Oh, yeah, but definitely, I mean, the point is friends would come over. I mean, no one had the USS Flag.
Yeah.
You know, it was on the cartoon, but no one actually owned the toy, but we did, and we just owned a lot of these things. When I watched the cartoons with you the other day, we watched these episodes, every character that came on, I was like, oh, I had him.
Yeah. It's the same, like, for when we watched Strawberry Shortcake, and I was like, I had that gazebo. The other thing I want to say, too, is that Steve's mom has been known to sit out on Black Friday and wait for the toy to be available.
Yes.
So that may be why she got it. And
I don't know how
did.
she got it, but I don't know how they got their hands on that.
But somehow they managed.
They made so many vehicles for G.I. Joe, along with so many actual figures, hundreds of figures.
So with this show, when was it? Was it a Saturday morning cartoon, or was it after school like He-Man?
I watched it after school like He-Man. Okay. He-Man and G.I. Joe.
Maybe in a block?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, yeah. He-Man, G.I. Joe, and Transformers were the big ones for us.
They probably played them at like 3:30, 4. Like,
they did, right after school.
Right, all in a row. Yeah, so for me, I remember it more of just as kind of how what you said about Alf a couple weeks ago. Like, it's in the background and it's there, and when I see it, I'm like, that's part of my childhood. The song, I definitely remember part of because the ads were everywhere. When G.I. Joe was big, they had that ad, like, Real American Hero, and kids playing with toys, every commercial. And I think for, if you're watching kids shows, even if it's not G.I. Joe, that commercial would be on constantly for, again, the different, like, now you can get this, now you can get this, now you can get this, with the things that separate, like, all of that. My brother definitely had a lot of action figures. He was born a little bit later, so he had, I think, a number of G.I. Joes, again, probably secondhand. And then he got super into Power Rangers, which we're going to, at some point, revisit.
That was a little bit later, yeah.
I'm delaying it. I don't think it's going to be good. But, yeah, so I just remember just the guys that, like, the boys at daycare and in my, like, kindergarten, first grade, second grade class, bringing these to school with them, going crazy and having the new ones all the time. I don't know that with He-Man, I think I probably had seen an episode of it, maybe here or there. I don't think I've ever actually seen an episode of G.I. Joe, because there was a lot here that surprised me.
Okay.
Yeah. So
the other thing I will mention with my memory, and you mentioned it a little bit during the history, but this was one of the cartoons where I vividly remembered the knowing is half the battle, the moral or positive message that had to be at the end.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't know it had to be there, right? But it became a G.I. Joe thing. Like, knowing is half the battle, G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
But some of these messages were pretty impressive for our kids, right? I mean, like the one we saw in the, when we watched the episodes was the kid was home alone, and he gets a call from someone who says, hey, is your mom and dad there? And he says, nope, they're not here. And he goes, oh, well, I've got a free prize for you. What's your address? And I'll come by. And the kid tells him, and then he goes outside, and Roadblock, one of the G.I. Joes, happens to be there, and he's like, what's going on? And the kid tells him, and he goes, we should never tell someone that your mom and dad aren't home.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good message, especially for, in the 80s when I grew up, and there was a lot of lock-key kids who came home from school, and their parents were at work.
And that was something that was different.
Yes.
And because by the 80s, a lot of moms and dads were both working, and you might come home from school and be watching G.I. Joe by yourself for a half hour before your parents came home. There's also a whole thing in the 80s of, like, stranger danger.
There was that, too.
That. So I liked that we watched that particular one. It surprisingly was not part of the episode. So let's get into the original 1983. We start with the song and the Yo Joe, and the song is so long.
It is, and it's almost a little mini cartoon in the intro.
It is so much longer than I thought it would be, because There are, if you haven't seen it, I mean, definitely go on our blog and check out where this is, because we have the links. But if you haven't seen it in a long time, the part that I remembered from the commercials is what I would call, like, the cool part. And then we have a long talking piece.
You have a narrator telling you who G.I. Joe is as a team, and that they're always fighting Cobra.
Yes.
So you understand before you get into it.
So you know before you get into it who it is, which actually that was the first thing that surprised me. And then we have these, like, this really cool montage of all the different, basically, branches of the military, right? You have the boats and the planes are flying and the tanks are going and all of that. What I was kind of surprised about, I mean, I guess I don't know what I expected. It is sort of there are science fiction elements, obviously, right? We're talking about some high-tech stuff that now exists that did not exist back then, like fingerprint scanning and things like that. But we also have, like, teleportation and obviously things like that. But I guess I thought it would be more fantasy, and there was some pretty realistic violence. Like, it is a cartoon, but it's not cartoon violence the way that, like, Acme was.
Right.
So I think it's a whole totally different kind of show for kids at this point that probably had not been done before.
There's a lot of laser gun fights.
There's actual bullets. There's missiles.
Yeah, they did. There's a lot of laser gun or tracer gun type, so you can see where the lasers or bullets are going. There's a lot of explosions, but if you notice, one of the interesting things was, too, is there's all these machine gun or laser gun fights back and forth. Vehicles get blown up, but no one actually gets hit.
Right.
When a vehicle gets blown up, right before it gets blown up, somebody ejects out, right? Or a lot of people get captured, but it's it never actually shows someone.
Well, it's
being
a lot
shot.
like James Bond or the A-Team, which we might watch at some point. Mr. T has said that about the A-Team. Like, I got shot in the arm more times than I could count, because they would always want to be, like, kind of hurt, but not really. Like, nobody ever really gets hurt. One of the other things I noticed was the cinematography in this first episode. In animation, obviously it's different because you're not, you're drawing the scenes that you're filming. But they cut so much, especially while people are talking. So what I mean by that is, like, they'll have an angled shot at a 45-degree angle looking up at someone, and then they'll switch to a close-up of the other person's face, and then they'll pull out to show both of them. Then they'll go from above. A lot of the shots were above, showing them walking on, like, the aircraft carrier or the Cobra's temple or whatever. And the cuts, I noticed especially, they did speed up the action. So even the dialogue seemed like it went very quick. They're doing a lot of info dumping because it's the first episode. Right. So they have a woman who later turns out to be the Baroness.
One of Cobra's main people. Yep.
Main people. Is she supposed to be German or Russian?
You're kind of left to not know.
But she's disguised as one of the G.I. Joes.
Yes.
And then the Cobra people show up because basically she summoned them.
Yes.
And they teleport. And then she takes her hair down and she puts on green glasses and they're like, the Baroness!
It's a Clark Kent moment.
A Clark Kent moment.
Well, she takes off a mask.
Oh,
and
okay.
her hair, because she would wear a mask sometimes, too.
Yeah, but... Yeah, so it was just funny to me. But my point is that when they're doing that, they're talking a lot about who Cobra is, what they want, what they're trying to get, how they're trying to stop them. And as they're doing that, they're walking to see this machine that Cobra wants. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was a really smart idea to cut up, in terms of, like, if you call it cinematography, to kind of cut that up. Yes. Because it is also how a comic book would be, with different panels.
The interesting thing is this is a contemporary to He-Man, which I really liked, but the animation is way better than He-Man's.
I didn't like the animation.
He-Man's animation, you could tell when we discussed this
they
in that
looped
episode,
some of it.
where they looped a lot. Here, with all the different angles and shot, they did not do that.
No, they didn't. They spent a lot of money doing that. But I did like that it made things go faster because this is an action show.
Yes.
And They had some crazy stunts flipping off of a motorcycle and as something blows up and, that kind of thing.
At one point, Duke and Scarlet flip and somersault to avoid bullets.
Together.
Which, as a kid, it was amazing. Now that I'm an adult and I've been in the Army, I'm like, this is ridiculous, right?
Well, especially because that's a moment of, sexual tension for them. They flip and roll away from bullets, so Cobra, attacks their base. They flip and roll away from bullets, but they do that together, and then she lands on top of him, and they're like, oh, ooh la la. They're, winking at each other a little bit. And I was sad about the Baroness because my first thought in my notes I put, there's a woman who's a major in this army and they have more than one female character and it's not like she's just a token woman. And then she turned out to be a spy.
But it's okay because then there was a woman on the bad guy team.
I know, but just one.
And she's a baroness. That's higher than a major. Okay?
Now I will say, I will maybe.
She has a title, Megan, and you will respect Baroness's title.
Well, what was interesting to me was that besides the one female character in this, but then we have two, because actually we still see Scarlet in the 1986 version.
We do, yep.
But both the 83 and the 86, especially for the time, were very diverse.
I wrote that down as well. They were both the cast of characters, including action figures and everything like that, of G.I. Joe it was very diverse, especially for its time.
Because we had, and some of this because we just watched one episode, I noticed a couple in the background. Now we did have a guy in a cowboy hat. It is never explained why he has a cowboy hat on. It's never.
Well, again,
we never talked to him.
Remember, you mentioned that they're trying to make them have diverse personalities.
Yeah, they are.
Right?
But we had people who are clearly of Asian descent and possibly Hispanic, and then African American as well. So that I was kind of surprised about. But you've been in the military. It's diverse. It is diverse. It's a diverse group of people. So one of the other things that I did like, and we'll talk about the end of it, but one of the things I did like, they had really good cliffhangers before the ad
I was going to
breaks.
mention that too. Yeah, this cartoon was interesting because they would do G.I. Joe often would do cliffhangers and then pick up after the ad breaks, or even cliffhangers at the end of an episode if it was part of a miniseries.
But it does make you want to keep watching, and that's something that, here's why I liked it. I like shows that are for kids that don't treat kids like idiots. Okay? And I liked the fact that they are doing a cliffhanger in this, now later on at the end of the episode it's different, but they do a cliffhanger the way any show for adults would do a cliffhanger, and they're trusting you to come back, and it's a point of tension that you kind of have to sit through a 2-minute ad break to release that tension. And narratively it's a smart move. It's like coming up at the climax of the action, and then you're left hanging. And it was really nice for us that we didn't have those. Tubi has some ads, but we didn't have the ads every time. So we just kind of came back into it. Oh, so yes, they have a lot of this combat. They also show really cool hand-to-hand combat, so you can see, I'm guessing for you, how you would play with the toys. Yeah,
it wasn't a lot. You had a lot of large army gunfights, but then there was a lot of times that they would get one-on-one, and that would be they would be using martial arts, or they'd be fist fighting, things like that, which was really interesting. It is a adult looking back on this episode. It was interesting as well because at one point G.I. Joes are guarding the satellite, and the general mentions that we need to guard this because Cobra and anyone else will try to get their hands on it because once we launch this, there'll be no place that anyone in the world can hide. Yeah. And I'm like, and Cobra wants to steal this, and I'm like, is Cobra the good guy? Because that sounds like a terrible satellite for any government to have. But then in the same episode, he gets to Cobra's base and they have a slave pit, and I'm like, oh, they're a bad guy.
So this is what I was going to say, too, because this was one of the moments where Duke goes in, he has this really cool hand-to-hand combat, but there's too many of Cobra's guys, they overtake him. And Cobra, who we haven't talked about yet, but he has just a face shield.
COBRA Commander,
We never see his face.
You never see his face.
Annoyed me. But Cobra goes, throw him in the slave pit. I want him alive. Throw him in the slave pit. And Steve and I both go, what? And then Steve looks at me and he goes, did he just? And I'm like, yeah, we're going to have to save that for the podcast because I can't talk about it right now. So we somehow go into this weird segment where there are these slaves who have like a brainwashing headband on, but they're dressed like Roman.
They're like in togas.
Yeah, they're
almost.
in togas.
And it's the slave pit is
it
like
might as well be the
quarry.
Colosseum. It's the Colosseum.
No,
basically.
that's different.
No, the pit, where the slaves are living. Yeah. But it's basically like a rock quarry that they're all like wandering around and they're like, and
then they move Duke from the slave pit to the fighting ring, which is the Colosseum.
That's the Colosseum.
Also in this underground headquarters.
Yeah. And also that it's Cobra's temple.
Yes.
There's a couple other people who you couldn't see their face, but we have now, I was not sure of his name.
Destro.
Is it Death Throw?
Destro.
Destro. Okay. But we see Destro and he's got like a cobra, like a hood, like a snake would be. And I thought it was interesting that they also had Cobra kind of hissing his S's.
Because there was, as someone who watched this cartoon over the series, you were led to believe that something was wrong with Cobra Commander.
Well, yeah.
Or that he was maybe part snake. Like you didn't know. And having his face never shown, that was part of that. No one ever knew. And even in the later cartoons, as you saw in 1986, they went from him having a helmet to having a mask. It was like a hood.
Yeah.
And that actually was fantastically genius on Hasbro's part, because then if you already had Cobra Commander, you now had to buy hooded Cobra Commander, which I also went and was a sucker for.
Let me ask you a question about this, because I feel like, did the hood come off on the toy?
No.
Okay.
You could never see his face.
Right.
So the original toy, he had the helmet with the silver piece.
Yeah.
Then it went to hooded Cobra Commander. Mm-hmm. And it was a different toy you had to buy now because it was no longer Cobra.
And then this guy comes out to fight. I almost call him G.I. Joe. I'm ruining people's childhoods. But this guy comes out to fight Duke, and it's very clearly supposed to be like Samson from the Bible. There are pillars there, and he
knocks them out.
Pillars.
Yes.
And I put, is this like David and Goliath? Nope, it's like Samson. That's what's in my notes. And so the end of the episode, we have another cliffhanger. I want to say, too, a lot of the cliffhangers feature a hand coming at the screen, which is, again, a really cool way to film it. And I think possibly unusual for animation at that time. But we have a cliffhanger.
They show a little bit of what's going to happen next.
Yeah, they show a preview of the next episode. I don't know if they did they do that all the time?
No, because not all the time was a miniseries. A lot of them are one-shot episodes.
I was going to say, I think it's because we were watching the 5-part miniseries. So it's also to reassure very young kids who might be watching this that they're like, and next time Duke fights this guy, but he finds an ally in him.
Yeah.
And then it shows one of the people who's supposed to be brain dead. She goes, I must help him.
Yes. You have a cliffhanger, but for some kids, you know that it's not going to end badly.
Right.
So it's like a reassurance. Yes.
Yeah. And that's basically how the show ended. We have a cliffhanger, but then we had a little bit of what was going to happen in the second episode and a taste of what was coming up, which I said to Steve, I was like, well, we don't have to watch episode 2 now because they showed us all the high points. But, so we moved from that
to the 1986 episode.
Yeah, so season 1, episode 1, Pyramid of Darkness. This is after they've done... Okay, so I wrote this. I looked it up again, sorry. They had a 5-parter in 83 that's now called Mass Device. Mm-hmm. They had a 5-parter in 84, Revenge of Cobra, also called Weather Dominator.
Yep.
Guess what machine they were trying to get.
Yep.
Then they had the full series started in 85 with another 5-part adventure. So I think that this was probably picking up after the 5-parter from 85, but continuing with,
And after this, they have another 5-parter called Arise, Serpentor, Arise. And a new villain, Serpentor, comes into play, who's more powerful, and it creates a very weird 3-party dynamic.
Yeah, what I have to say about... I didn't mention this before, but we're so used to long-form TV now, this would have been very unusual. Especially for a kids show. So a lot of the miniseries from like 70s, 80s, 90s, before we have the ability to stream, but really even before that, to watch things on DVD where you can watch them sequentially.
Yeah.
That those miniseries are typically based on books. A lot of times, like Thornbirds, if you remember that one, North and South.
Right.
Those kind of things. So to have a miniseries for kids that's 5 parts, they're 22 minutes, 24 minutes each. That's essentially a movie. I mean, back then, TV was like 30-minute TV is 3 acts, right? The problem, the twist, or the complication, and then the resolution. 5 acts is for 60-minute TV, and you have like setup, problem, complication, twist, climax, resolution. But I just thought that was so well done. And again, you can definitely see that they worked with Marvel.
Well,
here.
it guarantees you also that the kids were going to come home from school tomorrow and turn G.I. Joe on.
That's true.
Right? They saw part today and they're like, oh man, tomorrow I have to see it.
Yeah.
And so, you got the kids' attention.
It also, but it really, the only other thing that I can compare that to are the superhero shorts that would be like, that you'd see like with movies where they do like sections of things, right? Like you'd see like Superman and they'd have like, oh, he's hurtling to his death, and then the next week with a different film it would pick up. But I can't think of anything that I know of from TV at that time. So I was kind of impressed with that. But we have a whole other set of characters. The sailor, I want to talk about the
shipwreck.
Okay. The parrot. The parrot, I wrote down some of the dialogue. Okay, they have to swim for it. Their ships have wrecked, and they're like, we're going to have to swim for it. So he holds his nose, and then he clamps his hand onto the parrot's beak. And then when they come up, the parrot goes, I'm a parrot, not a duck. And he says, keep swimming or you'll be a gone goose.
Yeah.
And we have this kind of dialogue throughout the whole thing.
You'll be happy to know Shipwreck came with the parrot.
That's great.
The parrot was molded in a way so that its talons were like little hands, and they clapped onto Shipwreck's arm.
Nice.
So he could hold the parrot, or the parrot could be perched on him.
Did Snake Eyes come with the wolf?
Snake Eyes, that variation, there was like 4 variations of Snake Eyes.
Okay.
Because he was one of the most popular characters, and then it kept kids having to buy him. That variation of Snake Eyes came with Timber the Wolf.
Okay, so here, because there's not as much info dumping in this particular episode, they kind of assume that you know the world a little bit.
Yes.
I don't. And I was like, Snake Eyes, we didn't see an episode in the first one we watched.
He was in episode 1.
But was he with Cobra?
No, he was with G.I. Joe, but
because we didn't see his face either.
He was in blue, so he almost blended in with Cobra, which I think was part of the color change to black with him. And he also didn't wear gloves for some reason. So in the first episode, he's got blue on, a blue helmet, everything's blue, and then he has regular skin-colored hands hanging out because there's no gloves on him.
But he's just very... I was surprised because we didn't see his face, so I wondered if he was kind of in with them. But then he didn't. I thought he would be like a betrayer, like Baroness.
You never see Snake Eyes' face, and he never talks.
They have a lot of accents in this one, too, more than the first one. Again, those specific personalities. But there are a couple, like, really thick Southern accents. Like, real thick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lady J has a bit of an accent, who's the new girl companion to Flint.
But they still have Scarlet, which I was impressed by.
Yep.
Because the reason that I say this, there were a lot of shows in the 80s, like The Smurfs is a good example, where they only had one girl to like 50 guys. And so you have a lot of shows like that where there's kind of like that token female character. And then we have, so they're getting the cargo onto the space shuttle. I had to check the dates because... So what makes me think that this was filmed in 1985 as opposed to 1986 is that in 1986 is also the Challenger explosion.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't think they'd have a main plot device around putting extra cargo that's dangerous onto a shuttle, very specifically. And the way that it was filmed with the shuttle taking off and then separating from the other, the larger thing that shuttles are attached to, the name of which I forget right now.
The boosters,
Yeah, the boosters. I don't think that they would have had that, at least not for a few months following that, because so many kids watched that because there was a teacher on board.
Right.
If you were not alive at that point, the Challenger was a space shuttle that was going to be the first one to carry civilians. And it had one of the civilians chosen was a teacher. There was a problem with ice. When it went up, it exploded.
Right.
And it was a tragedy, and many, many children, including myself, in kindergarten, I watched that. And, but at any rate, they put cargo onto a space shuttle, and then we have these little gray things that are kind of like, at first I thought maybe like Star Trek, like the Tribbles. They look very cute.
They're like very teddy bear-ish.
But then they have this card that they're reading off of from Cobra. The card says one thing, but the guy reading it says something totally different that's not written on the card.
Yes.
So if you were maybe 4 or 5, you might not know, but I just thought that was funny. But basically it says that they be careful because they have a split personality. And then I'm like, well, Gremlins came out in 84, and it is almost like that you have like a cute little thing that then turns into a monster.
Yes.
So we have that going on in the spaceship, and in the meantime, Snake Eyes and Shipwreck are trying to get into the underwater secret lair of Cobra. And then it ends on a cliffhanger because it's a 5-parter.
Yes. It ends on a cliffhanger after Snake Eyes and Shipwreck go undercover by dressing up as Cobra people, where Snake Eyes still has his helmet and everything on and just puts a hat on top of it.
I forgot. And then they're in like a weird, it's like a subway where they're all like holding on to the
they're
thing.
on a train with like other guys, and Shipwreck's like, hey man, how's it going? Yeah, good shift. And Snake Eyes is just standing there in his black Snake Eyes costume with a Cobra uniform over the top of it and a hat, and his wolf standing next to him on the subway.
And then the voice print, they try to get into another part of the layer, and their voice print is wrong.
Yes.
Which is, again, like an interesting piece of technology. Like, we're not quite there.
Right.
And the voice print is wrong, and then we hear, you will be exterminated, which sounds so much like it's from Doctor Who. It sounds exactly like the Daleks from Doctor Who. So I could see in here, it's an interesting kind of fun story. It is action-packed, but they are borrowing from a few other things. And we did mention the twins. Cobra is there with his hood instead of his, face shield, and he's there with the twins, one of which has a scar.
That's to
so
keep
you can tell them apart.
Yeah. Well, actually, is it Tomax and Zaymont?
I don't know.
Or the twins, I believe. I'm going by memory, because I had the twins. And the twins come dressed identically but mirror imaged of one another.
Oh, okay.
And also Tomax had a scar on his chest, on one side of his mouth. And even in the action figures there was a little scar, so you could tell which guy was which.
So you can play with both of them.
And you could play with them, yeah. And so that was a big piece. Also, Zartan is in this one, Zartan was a mercenary who worked for Cobra, and he's a master of disguise.
Right.
He was under disguise in order to get in the space shuttle.
And I forget to mention, we also have another thing where somebody pulls off their mask, and there's somebody else underneath, and the real person is...
but that was Zartan's thing.
Yeah.
He was known for... He would actually remove his mask, but he also could just make him... He was like... He could camouflage himself. And his action figure, if it was in, like, sunlight or direct, like, depending on the light, it would change color.
Oh, interesting.
Which was really cool.
Kind of like those hypercolor shirts that we used to have.
Yeah.
So it ends on another cliffhanger, and then we get a preview of what's coming up, and then we moved over to watch part of the 2005 version of G.I. Joe, Sigma 6, which is also on Tubi, and then we watched the 2011. What were your impressions of the 2005? I'm guessing you'd never seen this before.
I have not, but it's interesting because much like the Strawberry Shortcake, I liked the originals. I didn't care for the reboots.
Yeah.
The 2005 G.I. Joe Sigma 6, first off, it's very, and probably because of the 2005 year, right? It's very high-tech oriented. Mm-hmm. Everything about the Joes is high-tech, and it's all this, like, equipment that appears out of nowhere and all this stuff. And
one of the guys is actually named High Tech.
Yeah, one of the guys is High Tech. But then you also have Duke, Scarlet, and Heavy Duty, who were people from before.
I should say, too, it's an anime style.
It's very anime style, which I don't care for.
The other problem that I found watching this is because it's anime, to me, it's a mixture of anime and computer-generated images. So it's CGI plus anime, and because of that, it is dated.
Yes.
Because when you have traditional animation, I guess to a certain extent, maybe that seems dated too. But to me, traditional animation seems like classic.
Right.
This is pretty cheap anime and pretty cheap CGI, and they don't mesh very well either. So you have like a computer generated graphic come up, and then the anime and the background is CGI, and it didn't seem to mesh. But so that story is, there's a guy called Overkill who looks maybe like a brain in a jar, but he might also be a robot.
He's like a cyborg robot or something.
Yeah, and like. Cobra again looks a little bit different, but still has you can't see his full face.
Yeah, COBRA Commander has a mask again.
There was a lot more talking and explanation. We didn't watch even the first episode. We watched episode 9, which is called Polar.
Yes.
Which we thought would be kind of cool. We were like, well, we saw them in space, and we saw them underwater, and we saw them on land. Let's see them like in the Arctic.
Yeah.
And the Arctic was kind of neat, but there were kind of, again, some attempts at witty dialogue, but very forced. The hornets have left the nest, but if we stay here, we're going to get stung.
Yes.
Things like that. But yeah, it didn't, it felt slower. Surprisingly. A lot of talking and explanation.
The G.I. Joes are trying to stop the bad guys, which are kind of Cobra. It's like this Overkill cyborg works for Cobra, but has his own thing going on. And he's drilling in Antarctica to try to get power gems or something. The whole thing was very video game-ish, which I didn't like.
Well, and also because, the older episodes that we watched, there's a teleportation machine. There are things that can power it. They have to find those before Cobra does. Mm-hmm. The second one we watched, Cobra put stuff on board to take over the space shuttle. They're trying to stop him by going underwater to get into his lair. This was so convoluted, and they talk about info dumping. They talk about it forever, and even as an adult, I'm like, wait, what are they doing? And not the kind of fun way. Like when we talked about He-Man or Strawberry Shortcake, there were things there where you have to just suspend disbelief. I don't know if Strawberry Shortcake is a fairy. Like, just go with it. Yeah. I don't know why He-Man has a separate castle separate from the Power of Grayskull. I don't know, but whatever. But here it was like they kind of tried to explain it, but then they explained it too much, and it was still confusing. So then we looked at the 2011
G.I. Joe Renegades.
Now, I have to say, I liked this premise a lot more than the other ones.
The premise was interesting.
So the premise basically is, they start with, we did watch the first episode of this called The Descent. They start with a fake ad, which reminded me of Better Off Ted. But they start with a fake ad of Cobra Industries. We're everywhere with global communications. Pharmaceuticals and defense. Yeah. But you're showing like, oh, they're big pharma. Mm. They're communications because they're watching, it's their big brothering it. And also their defense because they're making secret weapons.
So here, Cobra was legit.
Yeah, they were a corporation.
But then they were doing terroristic things behind the scenes.
And I wish that they had done regular animation with this, because again, it had this anime look. It was very angular. Scarlet in this looks like she's the Irish Lord Voldemort. She has no nose at all.
The animation is very poor.
It's very poor. And they also had a lot of split screens, which in comparison to the original, where we've talked about showing things from above, showing things from below, showing things at an angle, the split screen thing didn't work. But the premise of having, they have Lady J, Roadblock, Tunnel Rat, Ripcord, Duke, and Scarlet. Lady J is basically getting the team together in this episode. And the team is very diverse. It's an interesting group. There's this terrorist threat with vaccines and the military, and then we see the Baroness, and they're talking about Cobra, but he's not seen yet. I thought it was a really cool premise. I just thought that the animation sucked.
You know, the characters they bring in are all returns, right? Those are all Tunnel Rat, Ripcord. Those are all returns from the originals. It's interesting because Duke and Ripcord are also characters that were centered around the G.I. Joe movie, which happened before this now.
Right.
So I think they were trying to play that off from the movie because their rendition of Ripcord is very much like the Wayans brother who played him in the movie.
Oh, okay.
And so I think they were trying to connect that.
Was the movie against a corporation?
It might have been.
Maybe.
I don't recall as much. But, so that was it. I didn't care for the animation as much either. I liked the thought process behind the cartoon. I thought more could have been done with it. I thought the animation was very poor. And not only angular and things, but also the G.I. Joes themselves were very, like, pudgy and almost like... They almost looked out of shape the way they were drawn, and they're supposed to be soldiers.
I actually thought... So we talked about the diversity in the 80s version. The African-American character here and the Asian character are very stereotypically drawn.
Yes.
Like, very. And so is Scarlet. Very, like, much more, I thought, kind of sexualized than the first versions. Also, I wanted to ask, who is this for? Because I don't know the kids would relate to the idea of a big bad corporation. Right. The idea that secretly that it's like big pharma, I don't think they're going to get that. And I think if you were doing it for people who loved the show as kids, then having that traditional style animation, which you can do on computers. You can still have it be computer generated, but have that look. But yeah, the animation, they clearly did not have the budget, and it didn't run for that long.
And if you're looking for something to launch a new toy line, right? No kid wants to play with a toy that looks like, Duke was just sitting on a couch eating chips for 6 months. Like, that's not a real American hero. That's not even somebody that can make it through basic training.
And they are supposed to be renegades, which is interesting, but you're right that they're not going to have... They didn't even go in with any equipment, remember?
No.
They went in on the flight, and it's just them going in to kind of look like the military's there.
Yeah, and I think the renegades premise is because they're obviously probably further into this... I don't know how long the show ran for, but further into the show...
12 episodes or
Yeah,
so.
I would imagine they probably have to, undercover fight Cobra.
Right.
Because Cobra is a legit company, so now... And the army can't go against a legit company, so now they have to, pretend to not be part of the Joes to fight them or something.
Or that they go again, because we didn't get through the whole episode.
It was nothing for me.
Either that or that they break away from the Joes and they're their own, team kind of, what's that show where they always are let's steal a casino?
Oh, like Leverage.
Yeah, like Leverage, kind of like Leverage, where they're, doing good but undercover, right? So those were, are not great opinions about the reboots, but when we talk about the original series, any final thoughts before we do the rating? Let me put it that way.
I mean, in a lot of ways, it was what I remember it to be. I watched a lot of G.I. Joe, so it holds a strong point in my memory. It wasn't something I'd seen once or twice, and then I was like, oh, that's what it was,
And you were in the military.
Right, but that's a little different. I mean, obviously, than G.I. Joe, but it was interesting. I did like it. It wasn't... I guess there's rose-colored. I remember the animation was good. It wasn't as great as I remembered it being as a kid. Mm-hmm. But as a kid, this probably was top-line animation for what was going on in the 80s. I loved the fact when I was growing up that people I saw in the stories I could buy and own. And I could have them, and I could do my own, stories. And we would play G.I. Joe for hours. So this really does connect to me still. I thought, to be honest, especially in the original episodes that we watched from 83 and 86, I thought the storylines were pretty good. They still were something I could follow. Now, I don't know if I'm going to watch G.I. Joe all the time as an adult, but watching it for this, I was like, okay, I could kind of follow. I liked that it had subplots going on, and there was things that did catch my attention.
Yeah, I think that ultimately I liked the cliffhangers. I think it was plotted well. I think that action element was there with the fast pacing. The animation, I should say, it's done well. It's just aesthetically, color-wise, and because it's war and military, it's just not my jam. Right. but it's done extraordinarily well. And I liked the fact that I was surprised by the fact that it was, that long series of connecting, through 5 episodes, which I think at least, again, not for all of it, but for the ones that we watched.
So out of 10 medals, what are you going to give G.I. Joe?
So this is difficult because for me, I'm not going to watch this show again, and I don't like things with military. I don't like things with espionage and spy and things like that because it is, to me, kind of repetitive in the structure of the plot. But and would I show it to a kid? See, that's the other question. The violence is pretty realistic, so I would say, it would depend the age of a kid. Like, this isn't like He-Man where the action is like cartoon violence, where I would let a kid watch it. I'm like between a 4 and a 5, I guess. I mean, it's done. I'll give it a 5. It's done well. It's plotted well. It's good pacing. The cliffhangers were good. There obviously would be a lot there for kids it would spark a kid's imagination. Yeah, so 5 out of 10 medals. How about you?
8 out of 10 medals.
All right.
That's an easy answer. I would still watch it. I would allow kids to watch it. I think not like a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
But I think if a kid is 8 or 9 or 10 and you could get a hold of toys as well for the kid, I think it's something that works well.
That's a question that has come up before because with Strawberry Shortcake, which I gave a worse rating to, would I let a kid watch it? There's nothing bad there, but it annoyed me, and I don't know. I'd have to be careful about it. Honestly, I hate to say that. So, 5 out of 10 and 8 out of 10.
So 6.5.
6.5
is our total rating.
6.5 6 medals and a candy button. So 6.5 total for G.I. Joe. It was a really great, for me, it was a nice revisiting.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Of something I had never really fully paid attention to in that way.
A lot of things and characters I had forgotten that I remember that came back to me and reminded me of a lot of fun times with my brothers as children while I watched it. So that was good.
Yeah. So I highly recommend that you kind of revisit it too. It's free on Tubi. You can find the links for the episodes on our blog, and you can find us on our website, stopruiningmychildhood.com, which has links to all of our social media. We have Twitter and Instagram. We're probably most active on Facebook, and you can follow us there. We put sometimes questions like, what was your favorite childhood cartoon growing up, or what should we watch next? We'd love to hear from you. So stop by, follow, rate, and review. For a small podcast like ours, it does make the difference. We watched our cartoon this week. Coming up, we have our live-action show, Manimal. And then we're going to follow that with a movie, which will be Splash. So,
the mermaid movie.
The mermaid movie. But if you have suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. That's it from us this week. Thanks, everybody. I am Megan.
And I'm Steve.
And we'll see you next week.